Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to Café Muse. Thank you, Michael Davis, for the beautiful and very soothing guitar music, and Henry Crawford for the lovely fall show. Can't believe it's already fall, but that was beautiful. Thank you to the WordWorks for sponsoring our program. I'm Claire McGough, and I'm hosting along with Henry Crawford this evening. Henry is also our tech guru, working the magic behind the scenes to bring tonight's program to you, our wonderful audience. Our featured poets this evening are Carol Jennings and Andy Young. During the reading, you may use chat to comment or ask questions that our readers may answer during the question and answer period, if time permits. And Karen Alanier, our founder, will be moderating the question and answer. Our program is scheduled for 1 hour. You won't want to miss our next Café Muse reading, which will take place Monday, October 7th at 7:15 on Zoom. October's reading will feature Kevin McClellan and Ed Madden. It is now my pleasure to introduce our first reader. Carol Jennings grew up in the rolling hills of Western New York, attended the College of Wooster, graduated from NYU, lived for more than a decade in New York City, and now lives in Washington, D.C. In New York, Carol worked at the United Nations and the American Civil Liberties Union before earning a JD from the New York University School of Law. Carol served on the editorial staff of the New York Quarterly during its early years and is the author of an article, The Woman Poet, published in the early 70s. Her poems have appeared in various journals, including the New York Quarterly, Chautauqua, the Broadkill Review, Innisfree Poetry Journal, Beltway Poetry Quarterly, and many others, and also have been featured in 3 anthologies. 2 of her poems have won awards at Chautauqua Institution, where she spends some time each summer. Carol is retired and devotes a lot of her time to poetry and to the piano. Carol's first collection, The Dead Spirits at the Piano, was published by Cherry Grove in 2016. Her recent collection is The Sustain Pedal, right here. And that was just published in 2022. It's a full-length collection. As I was reading, well, I guess first of all, I wanted to say that I've been able to work with Carol together on the craft of poetry the past several years and have truly enjoyed getting to know her. And as I was reading and rereading her latest collection, something that really began to, I guess, occur to me was this undercurrent of gratitude that I kept. It was like a tone of gratitude that is sustained from the first poem, which is entitled The Flickering Light, of the collection, to the last poem that speaks to a Norwegian epitaph that reads "Takk for alt," or "Thanks for everything." Carol's latest collection, The Sustain Pedal, is something that David Keplinger calls a masterful composition, and it includes poems that speak to the curiosities of the poet, of travel, time travel even. Her collection includes adventures in the city, childhood and young adulthood, and the losses that come with living, especially living a long life. Carol's verses take the reader to Pompeii, where we listen to the voice of a young, trapped spirit. In another poem, we're allowed to eavesdrop on an intimate conversation with Beethoven. In her poem, Ultimate Thule, the speaker says, "I look at 3/4 of a century, measured in revolutions around the sun, a few lines written adagios on the piano, ancient ruins entered, dreams that twist dark reality, the deaths that keep coming." The epigraph Carol chose for her collection is a quote from Leaves of Grass: "That you are here, that life exists and identity, that the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse." Let's give a big welcome to Carol Jennings.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I'm going to start with the first poem in the sustained pedal, A Flickering Light, which Claire just mentioned. It's sort of describes my relationship to light. I love the long days and I do not love the short ones. And it seems appropriate right now. I'm watching the light fade out of my study window. A flickering light. Why so much time before I grasped its place in my life? Before I understood the possibility to bend and stretch, fold it into poems, stories, save it for dark seasons, follow it north or south, depending upon month and hemisphere, or simply keep it in some mind pocket until needed to deflect the dark. As a child enthralled to midsummer light, enough to bicycle home at 9 o'clock with no thought about the slant of it to come as days shorten and insects grow frantic and shrill about sex and death. I thought I could use it. I thought I could use it all up, the euphoria. Reserve nothing for later. Now I have mastered the art, or perhaps trick, of parsing it out in lesser portions to make it last. The way a flickering light can trick the eye to see it as a constant, and knowing this may be the antidote to everything. The next poem is called, appropriately, Poem Beginning with a Line of Rainer Maria Rilke. And the line that I chose is from him, is every angel is terrifying. Every angel is terrifying until you reach a certain time when they begin to appear in the half-awake dreams of pre-dawn sleep, especially in early summer, while cicadas vibrate a song saved underground for 17 years. They remind you not only of loss, but of what you will do that day. Pick strawberries for breakfast, sweep spent wings from the porch, invite a spirit companion to share your strawberries, and describe the possibility of another life, a before or after life, with a different tonality and absence of rhyme. This next poem is called After a Certain Age. And I wrote it for my 70th birthday, which was 10 years ago because I just turned 80. And it's still relevant. After a certain age. Do not count the number of funerals attended, people who have professed to love you, foreign countries not visited, vanishing rings of Saturn, wrong notes played in a Mozart sonata, or inches of sea level rise. And do not listen to the noise that is news, nor the harsh words of the dies irae. You will know when you have reached that age. Pay attention to stars in the darkest skies, planets visible to your unaided eye, lengthening daylight after winter solstice, layers of igneous rock in deep canyons, your ancestors. Time is an artificial construction, music that outlives its composer. I love, excuse me, I love glaciers and I love to write about glaciers. This one is called Moulin, which, as you probably know, is a hole in the glacier filled with meltwaters. It was inspired by a poem by Seamus Heaney, the Irish poet, a poem called Postscript, which had nothing to do with glaciers, but he was inviting the reader to travel out to the west coast of Ireland and just let the waves, the wind and the waves do their magic. And so I'm inviting the reader to visit a glacier and pay attention to the fact that we're losing it. Moulin. Take the time to walk back to the Pleistocene. Just off the highway between Jasper and Banff, park the car to board a snow bus that deposits you on the ice field. or you can guzzle glacial meltwater from a moulin, water with a purity that preceded your species. Pay attention, or you could tumble into a crevasse from which you would not emerge until the ice has melted. Kneel down, touch the glacial tongue with reverence, but know that you violate it. Consider that it recedes and loses depth beneath your body, that it may disappear within the life of your child. Let the ice pierce a hole in you, even as it melts. This one is called All Hallows Eve, so it's becoming seasonal. And the head note is a quote from John Keats to Autumn. Where are the songs of spring? Aye, where are they? Think not of them. Thou hast thy music too. All Hallows Eve. Because of tilt of earth and angle of sunlight, autumn crisps and curls across summer's fading fullness in its unrelenting passage. This is a time with its own colors, gold maroon and burnt red, in a leaf patchwork that floats after the heavy downpour, more flamboyant on water than waving on branches in air. Summer insect whine is silenced by death or sleep. The bird's nest abandoned for another hemisphere. Music replaced by acorns falling and burrowing creatures that crunch their way through downed leaves. Such a brittle time. The thin line between living and dead blurs. A spirit slips easily between worlds. We live on a slant, and light travels the shortest path through sky. The next one is called Vertigo, which is something I get from time to time. And this was an effort to describe it after one of the worst episodes I ever had, which lasted a week. Vertigo. Let faces from the past twirl on the crown molding of your room to ask you why. Let your childhood friends blindfold you, twirl you around, make you beg them to stop. Please let there be a potion, powder, or brew to drink, a chant, incantation, or rhyme that twists on the tongue to make things right again. Please let all creatures with legs be balanced. You can only lie flat, eyes fixed straight ahead, as the carousel spins around you, taunting with its brassy sound. This repeats daily until the dizziness is done. Then you descend stairs, rip off the blindfold, draw perfect 16th notes on parchment, play them in your head or on ivory keys. Listen to the sound waves of the brain. Read your fortune in tea leaves. Taste the bitter cube of the body's fragility and swallow it. This one is called Conversation with Beethoven. I like to use my poems to have conversations with people that I can't have conversations with because they're no longer around or because they lived in another century and I never knew them. And I particularly like to do this with the composers that I particularly like to listen to or play on the piano. Usually, of course, it's pretty one-way conversation. This is Conversation with Beethoven. He glowers, as he often did before. I wonder if this will be possible. He was deaf. I don't speak German. Does language still matter, I ask? He shakes his head. This was to be your year, 250 birthday celebration. He half smiles. Every orchestra programmed you, all the symphonies and concertos, Missa Solemnis, Fidelio, quartets. But a novel virus seized the living world. Everything had to be canceled. He shrugs as though he knows, or perhaps doesn't care much. Do you pay attention to performances anymore? He shakes his head. I'm guessing you like the size of orchestras now. It's what you always wanted, isn't it? Again, he almost smiles. I am suddenly aware of music unlike any I have heard before. What is that? Where is it coming from? It's not like anything you ever wrote. Finally, he smiles, motions me closer, speaks in a language I do not know, but understand. I am no longer bound by a system of tones that can be sketched on paper. I am truly free. Excuse me. This one is called To Michelangelo's Dying Slave, and it was written after a visit to the Louvre in Paris and seeing this magnificent statue, which is just so incredibly beautiful. To Michelangelo's Dying Slave. No pain mars your marble face, your pose almost erratic, left arm flung back behind your head, right hand fingering the spear slit in your chest, one knee bent, your David-like face tilted slightly away from us, eyes shut, your vision inward, release on your face as you die at your peak. Your body still radiates desire like a new star, even as you enter that space beyond desire, as if you hear a melody like the Liebestod, composed 300 years after your dying was carved. That one-time song when love and death meld before the end. If you could speak, you would tell us nothing. This one is about Mendelssohn. It was one of my favorite composers. And I'm particularly drawn to playing his songs without words. And I like the fact that there is no suggestion of content, nothing to suggest a theme. It's just they're numbered songs without words. And he just leaves the listener or the player for whatever images they evoke, which for me is generally light and spring and nature, and also my mother, because I remember her playing these songs. Oh, this is called Meditation, Spring, Mendelssohn, Songs Without Words. It was never just about lengthening light, the sun shifting hemispheres, buds that presage blossoms, or my being born. There was always a darker side. And then death happened. Father at equinox, mother a few days before. Spring became about endings too. Whatever the season or infection circling the world, I returned to Mendelssohn's later Ona Vorta, Songs Without Words for Piano, and try to borrow from my conscious self any language but tones. These songs are not about anything. At 9, Mendelssohn set Psalm 19 to music. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Later, he decided words were too limiting. Poems could be built solely with tones. In the Hebrides, he created a landscape without words or paint, calling it first the Lonely Island. Open fifth chords flow like the ancient lava that formed hexagonal pillars of black basalt in Fingal's cave. He enters it with no skiff, just violas, cellos, and bassoons in the key of D minor. I encountered Scotland first through Mendelssohn and reflect on memory of the Castle Campbell ruins, lonely in a field of heather, as I work out voicing and fingering of his arpeggiated chords. At the piano, my mother would allow no spoken words in the room. I take it further and exclude the silent ones as well. I'd like to read one from the first book, The Dead Spirits at the Piano. And this one is about Ireland, called the Burren, which is a glacial landscape in Ireland and towards the west coast. Very, very stark, beautiful, but stark. The Burren, more like a moon than earth, stark limestone landscape, glacier gouged and scraped. A portal tube holds balance as it has for 6,000 years over bones of a people who did not know they were the early act of an Irish saga, or that cutting all the trees would erode the soil that sustained them down to this slippery rock where only tough wildflowers survive in the fissures, or how differing visions of God would blight this island forever. We tiptoe gingerly. And then there's another one, the last one in this book, it's called Nebula, which sort of speaks to the changing climate and the changing universe and aging. Inuit watch the world melt beneath their feet, while farther south, sandbars wash away, deltas disappear. Astronomers feel the pulse of a star collapse, its nebula an apparition, like a dead lover's ghost. We measure time by the light of another doomed star, and after 60 or so cycles around the sun, the body prods with its temporal nature. As the mind tries to wrap itself around this life's limits, slippery as jellyfish. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And thank you, Carol Jennings, for gifting us with your beautiful poems. So now let me introduce our second poet this evening, Andy Young, who hails from the hills of West Virginia, but now calls New Orleans her home, and tonight graces the Zoom windows of Café Muse online. Andy's poetry is a tapestry of sensory-rich imagery, seasoned in those West Virginia hills and pulsing now with the rhythms of New Orleans, where bass drum and tuba thump through the streets and scraps of gold moat the air. As you read these poems, you see before you scenes so vivid you can almost smell the wormy gardenia bush or hear the shard of trumpet piercing the darkness. Andy Young teaches at the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts. She is a graduate of Warren Wilson's Program for Writers. In addition to her 4 chapbooks, Young is the author of a full-length collection of poems, All Night, It's Morning. Her second collection, Museum of the Soon to Depart, is due to be released shortly by Carnegie Mellon University Press. Young's exploration of memory and place in the context of grief yields poems that are at once deeply personal and familiar to all, whether conjuring up an emotionally powerful vision of pandemic loss or reflecting on the historicity of an ancient Egyptian citadel. Young's language stays alive with surprises, such as the Big Dipper becoming an axe that hacks against the heavens, or the grief being like labor-like squeezing. She's a teacher with 2 children of her own. So let's welcome Andy Young to Café Muse online.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction and for the powerful reading, Carol. I just got my review copy or my advanced copy of my book, so it actually is real. I wasn't sure until I held it. So I'm going to read from my physical book for the first time. So thank you so much for being here, everybody, to share this moment with me. So the book is divided into 3 sections, and I'll read a few poems from each of the sections. This first section is called Display of Grief. Grief during carnival season, 9th Ward, New Orleans. My new talent is to stare at exactly nothing. Air like the lead blanket used for x-rays. Blankness passing by my window like a train. There once was a boy who stopped talking. Later, he said he was in a glass box under the sea, and feared moving would break the glass. I am that boy. I used to think I would die of sadness, but have learned there is no such luck. So I sit by the wormy gardenia bush as bass drum and tuba thump through the streets, music gone as soon as it's heard, a gathering mist on the unvisited graves at St. Roch. But grief is a labor-like squeezing. The dead are not picky. You don't have to wash their graves. Across the river, bereft, they blink dumb in the bright nowhere, stare back at us, where scraps of gold moat the air over feathered heads and bright trinkets wink against the sun. A revelry that will end in ashes thrown into the Mississippi, ashes smeared on the foreheads of the devout. I could sleep for centuries when that darkness comes, and one day we all will. Until then, I'll steep at night. Though the dipper is less a ladle than an axe, just look next time how it hacks against the heavens. A shard of trumpet pierces the dusk, and all the once-bodied mothers float past, their hair in the wind like quicksilver. And this next poem is based on a photograph by Sebastião Salgado, a Brazilian photographer. And it is dedicated to my friend, Roberta Moore, whom you'll hear about in the poem, and after the influence of Marianne Baruch, who is a very important teacher to me and a wonderful poet. Abandoning the land in Ecuador. The women carry these sacks on their backs. They're men in cities, Quito, Guayaquil, port cities flooding to slum. I might have looked at this one with her, one of those lost days when we filled in years and emptied bottles, the kids thumping through the house. She stalked bargains to get this book, a book she knew I wanted. Take it for a while, she said. Now there's no her to return it to. Look at the black-haired women, their heads hidden under rounded hats like dark wool Q-tips. Fabulous, she said. Or did she? Did we look at this together? Did we talk about those hats? Around each woman's middle, a rope's fixed to hold the sack, so their hands are free beside the patient gray donkeys, all intent to stay on this path, to Chimbote, its market already buzzing off in the distance. She always took me to her farmer's market, filled our arms with bread and peaches, her fingers perfumed with basil. The women cross the cloud shadows that spill into the mountain's creases. A shroud is about to drop on the sun. Look at that woman in the middle of the line. She has a perfect flourish at the sack's top fabric. Or is that just a shape in the grass? Hey, sister, will you see her when you start your slow descent? And tell me, what is it tied to your cinch? A small fruit? A child shriveled by distance or my faulty sight? Why does the mountain blur to smoke like the need to live I sometimes lack? Let that cloud above your head be a figure. Let it stand for something. Let it be an intervention even. A rift in the surface, an arm stretched out. Oh, Jesus, let it at least stay a cloud, not gone to gray wash, or a drizzle far from here, where siblings pick bones from their mother's ashes. And this is the last poem in the section, Display of Grief. And there's some referencing back to Hurricane Katrina. And I thought it might be appropriate to read it because here in New Orleans, we're facing a little pop-up hurricane. So surprise, hurricane came out of nowhere. So anyway, thinking about hurricanes. Grief Walk, City Park, New Orleans, spring 2020. I wanted the night heron to mean something. I passed it each morning, and it stared at me with its jeweled eye as if it knew. I wanted it to be a spirit to guide or comfort, to warn even. Turns out it hangs around the bridge because of the cottonmouth nursery, woven into the bayou's fallen bamboo. It's there to stalk the hatchlings. What did I seek? Wandering the wilds of a city where cattle egrets huddle in neglected weeds beside the I-10, where the city's people were once left to thirst as they watch floodwaters swallow their shotgun houses. As I walk, I remember myself, someone's daughter in the world, rambling off in a faraway town, the language I skirted rich and impenetrable as the shadows. What has happened, happened. Now gorgeous invasive flowers keel over above my head, the air toiling with cobalt dragonflies. I wrote down my page numbers wrong. I'm still trying to work this machine. This is kind of new one. Okay. So this, we're moving into a different section of the museum now. This is the Hall of Pestilence and Unhealed Wounds. So sure to be more jolly than Display of Grief. This is called Fever Within. And it is based on art piece by Ronald Lockett that's made of rusted sheet metal with nails. He worked a lot with metal collage. Fever Then. Curled in the center, she is fixed to her atmosphere. Torn strips of silver peek out to some clear place beyond, where once the silver was a tin barn holding the hot hay mouths of young horses, curved warmth of new eggs. Here in the museum, its edges threaten to flake to dust, her spine a series of holes, her outline pocked with emptiness. Needles pulled out, what is not her pulls away, the world curling off with its bright rust, leaving the peeled back to the substratum, leaving her peeled back to the substratum of fever, the clinic oxidizing around her, only her body pinned down in the tube through which a liquid does not drip, but erodes between the silver intervals of what nails her there. And this is, I'll read just the first part of a two-part poem that's about a sketch of the painting Bonaparte visiting the victims of the plague of Jaffa. And this was in the Orientalism exhibit at New Orleans Museum of Art, but the final painting is in the Louvre, and this was the sketch, and it was just called The Pest House at Jaffa. So this is the first part, which is first sketch of the first sketch. This Napoleon turns his face away from the slumped body he half holds. The central figures Syrian, or so it seems from their lack of uniform. The one in red fixes startled eyes on the leader as if to give a message. In the Louvre's final sprawling version, those figures are gone. Instead, a slumped body rises to stand as Napoleon reaches out to touch his wounds. That version has an outside, clanging in daylight, beyond the striped arches of the mosque turned military hospital. We'd call what's outside Tel Aviv now. What would we call the Syrians? Palestinians? Where do their descendants live? In Damascus, maybe, or in a refugee camp in Yarmouk. its misery thick and similar to the plague house, a kindred jaundiced light. But they are in a frame outside the frame, as were the bayoneted prisoners and the 2 days of rape and slaughter Napoleon gave as a gift to his men. All eyes now on the emperor in his shaft of light. You either do or do not think he has a right to be there. And this is a poem about graffiti mural in revolutionary Cairo. And the Borak, it depicts a Borak, which is a religious figure and kind of half women, half horse, as you'll hear. But she's very important in Islam. Borak on Muhammad Mahmoud Street. Graffiti mural by Ala Awad, Cairo, 2012. Looking back, racing forward, the Borak can't land, her body a funeral of faces, an infant on her back whose wings won't work. Her hair splays around her, such a deep green, her legs, her equine body, deep green, back right hoof that does not kick but flies. She cannot land lest she tramples the already trampled, angled limbs, calm, battered faces floating where they reach from concrete as from a sea. Nearby, it said, humans sprang from the creator's tears. Now dust of factories, truck, exhaust, a market for caged lizards, tomato vendors, piles of olives, bean hawkers, traffic horns obliterate the clank of swords. Here, near Metro, near KFC, the revolution street battles, cops and batons against corrugated metal from street signs torn down to shield the unarmed. Her body runs, her head looks back, looks down where faces haunt red paint, two faint women shrinking behind the Baltageia, somebody's man charging sword first, head already a skull, a panther leaps to reach the women, drowning in black scratches, but the Borak looks past them and the limbs of those flying off. It's in wings of blood. I'll read a couple more from the last section, which is the Archives of Prayer. Family portrait as the golden mummies of Bahreya. A couple faces one another as if in conversation. This is how they were found. Now they lie in vitrines like fish and facing tanks, could not speak if they could speak. They were dressed for their death passage, not to be specimens in glass. Her bare breasts shine like doorknobs. Linen wraps for the poor, gold masked for the rich, eyes so lifelike, excavators gasped when they brushed the dust away. The revolution left no money for excavation. Thousands of mummies still lie in burrowed tunnels under the houses and roads. The dead do not ponder revolutions, but they like to sometimes be considered. Small mourning statues were found in the tombs, meant to eternally weep at their side. One man is a merchant with a Horus crown. Ptolemaic, someone says. Our son points to another's thickly outlined eyes. He is awake, he says, but does not answer. A stone girl, 5 years old, too poor for a golden crown. My daughter, also 5, asks if they're the same size. Yes, almost exactly. For a while, this is how our children will think of death. Gilded bodies that keep their shape, wide-eyed and adored. And I'll end with the last poem in the book, which is called St. Joseph's Day, Star of the Sea, St. Roch, New Orleans. I know right from wrong. St. Joseph always fed my children. On St. Joseph's Day, everyone is fed who wants to be. Plates of spaghetti, a fava bean for luck. I stand before the St. Joseph Shrine at the St. Roch Church, Star of the Sea, whose priest came to us last fall at 5 a.m. after I'd spent hours calling churches, reaching no one. I need a priest for my uncle, for my mother, for my uncle. She is worried for his soul. I don't know. When I ask another sister if it still counts to be blessed after the heart has stopped, the blood cooled, cooling. Yes, says the deep-voiced Nigerian priest at St. Roch, but I will have to come soon. On the altar, sesame seeds sprinkled by Sicilian hands around the braided loaves, lamb-shaped cakes, beans to remember the drought St. Joseph stopped, remember the mob who lynched the survivors' descendants. Not far from here, alien hands, said the flyer who rallied them, blot upon our vaunted civilization. After Katrina, the altars in wide white emergency tents where people who survived fed people who survived. Inside the tents, the long folding tables, food stacked, sardined pasta, spice on the lips, plastic plate buckled in abundance, like the tables of God in the streets of Alexandria, when the voice at sunset calls out to break the Ramadan fast. On the altar, lilies, oranges, almond cookies, bread shaped like turtles, like purses of St. Joseph to remember the poor, like the shroud of Turin. Yes, a shroud of bread. Prayer cards of St. Joseph the Father, St. Joseph the Worker, brown skinned St. Joseph, what we would call now a Middle Eastern man. White candles for our fathers, for my Middle Eastern husband, for my uncle who was not a believer, though we held his hand and prayed around him, hallowed be thy name. People are bartering children for safe passage. People are washing up like fish after a spill. Watch the world's back turn, turning them back to where they fled. What have we become? What have we yet to become? I shudder to shudder before this bread we cannot eat, before this bread we can, this bread called Aish in Arabic, the word for life, also a word people chanted in the streets. Thank you.
Thank you much, poet Andy Young. Big Cafe Muse hand. Thank you. Wow, that was a metaphorical pop-up hurricane of images and words. Thank you for popping that up for us. Karen, it looks like we have a little time for questions of these two poets, so I'm going to turn the proceedings over to Karen Alanier.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you to both of our good readers here. I noticed that both of you had interesting voices in your work, that there was a predominance really of voices. And I wonder if we could start with Carol, and I would ask of you both, could you talk a little bit about the influence of the voice on your work and maybe where it comes from, who may have influenced you in that regard? Carol, you were particularly interesting in the way that you were writing, to these voices from the past or people that, you were trying to be in touch with. So we'll start with you on that subject.
Wow, that's that's not an easy question. I guess, a lot of it comes to me through music, and that's one reason I kind of focus on music in my writing, that in listening or in playing, I do sort of hear a voice that is what I imagine the composer intended. And the same for, I don't know, looking at a work of art, or even in reading other poets. It's just, um, you know, whose voice is this is the thing that I'm always looking for, and you know, and whatever I'm looking at or listening to or playing or reading.
Yes, I think you know that's an interesting point, because the voice could be not just the human voice, but the voice of the work. You know, the voice, the tone, the pitch, all of these things that are suggested by music, but also suggested by a piece of art. So I liked your answer very much. Thank you. And Andy, what do you say?
I think it's a very deep question. I guess the first thing that comes to mind for me is something that the poet Valgina Mort said, which is poetry is the language the dead use to help us forget that they are dead. I think that I'm maybe sometimes chucking with the spirits or with the dead. I feel, you know, there's something that in everyday language or thought doesn't work to connect to that which I'm most interested in. So I think maybe poetry is that connection. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what it makes me think about.
Well, I think it's very much in keeping with what we heard from your work, and you know, to reach into the spiritual part of the voice. It works for me as an answer. Yep.
Thank you.
And I was thinking that perhaps each of you could pick one short poem as a concluding gesture for the reading, and start with you, Carol. If you have one short poem that would be possible. I didn't see any questions in the chat, so I think that we can do this and have a little more poetry.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will read one that is not in either book. It's fairly new, called Lonely Flowers. And this came from a piece of music by Robert Schumann called Lonely Flowers in translation. And it really kind of spoke to me about, you know, something I'd never considered, the loneliness of flowers, and which flower could be lonely and why. And also it was kind of thinking about Schumann's, his mind in his last years, which he spent in what would have been called an insane asylum. And his wife was not even allowed to visit him. Lonely Flowers for Schumann. I never considered the loneliness of flowers until I played your Einsame Blumen, so deceptively easy as neglecting loneliness, then needed to know the loneliest of all. Not the showy honeysuckle or hydrangea, inviting bees to feast, forage, buzz, as though making love. And definitely not the roses, so confident of perfection. The loneliest are wild daffodils, where Wordsworth wandered cloud lonely, coming too early to have company and too short-lived to love even themselves. Clara did not care to perform these woodland scenes, sensing perhaps they foretold a dark forest of solitude in your mind that would lead to a river in winter, the end of music, confinement in a place she could not visit to bring flowers or songs. Others like me will find romance in your two voices that twice join here, a B natural and a B flat, in lonely dissonance.
Well, thank you. That was really wonderful, and it really even upped the ante relative to the question about voice. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And Andy, how about you? Do you have a short poem that you can end with?
Sure. Yes, I'm going to use, we still have daylight here, but it's this weird, like pre-storm, like purple light. So I'm going to use my flashlight here. so I can see. Okay, Picasso's Kitchen, and this was from the Picasso Museum in Barcelona, where they had this whole display of all Picasso's paintings related to food. So a lot of this language is actually his. I will suck the bones of the fish flesh, then cast the bones in clay. I will interrogate the plums with the sun of this bulb. Even a saucepan can shout, everything can shout. I shout around swirl of paint to make an apricot right in the center of your wars, your morals. To hell with these confines, the lines defined by your limits, even with bread rations. I will still live, still life with green lemons and 2 fish, still life with radishes, with conger eels, with snack, with jug, with green bottles, red bottles, blue broken bottles of wine. There will be no face for the woman with the lemons in her lap. I turn bird flocks into clots of pink and toss them from a window, having learned nothing but to love things and eat them alive.
Wow. A wonderful way to finish the evening. And we have art, on both sides of our readings tonight. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn the program back to Henry. Thank you, Henry, for both hosting and being the tech guru tonight.
Well, thank you, Karen. And I guess that's a wrap for our September Café Muse online program featuring the poets Carol Jennings and Andy Young. I'd like to thank my co-hosts tonight, Claire McGough and Karen Alanier. And let me also thank Michael Davis for the excellent music. And here's a shout out to the hardworking Café Muse team. Here's the whole crew: Ellen Cole, myself, Henry Crawford, Maj Dagama, Renee Garrity, Luther Jett, Claire McGough, and our founder, Karen Alanier. I want to thank our audience and, of course, the poets for sharing their poetic visions with us tonight, and ask you to please join us online Monday, October 7 at 7:15 p.m. Eastern, when we will feature the poets Ed Madden and Kevin McClellan. And until that time, be safe and have a good night. Thank you.